What you see here is are the measured in proportions of the classic box cutter I have. You see, basically the way how I worked was I measured everywhere the distance or the diameter, and then, for example, I spaced those rings out by, for example, measuring the complete length. Then, for example, I found the midpoint. There I could put in the third part, and then between those rings from midpoint to midpoint, I was able to draw a line to, for example, then place the smaller circle. So it's a little bit of geometry. For example, here from this ring midpoint, I drew out a 6mm line, because then that 6mm line I was able to use, for example, to create my arc. So here with the arc, I can say control snap to this point, and this point. There is my complete arc, and the one I need to break later. So I have half a segment for my revolve. And for example, here you see a different set of lines. They, for example, describe kind of like some measurements of the front part. I also have some lines for the width, top, and also bottom. And for example, I would like to have a profile extruded along this line later, this arc. But no, this arc needed to be rotated perfectly the same way. And the way how I constructed this one, for example, was I go to perpendicular, for example, click on this line, and then I go to side view. Now I can draw a perpendicular line. For example, I need to measure that distance. Control click, left mouse button, move it out. Then I can reset the control point and, for example, snap this one to this point. So you see, this way I created the first line perpendicular to this line, and then this one basically kind of parallel, just rotated. And then I have my control points, for example, to create this arc, which perfectly is perpendicular to this line. So it's not really complicated, it's just a little bit of geometry, and the key point curves here are pretty fantastic for that. So when I evaluate my model, I notice that this line, for example, from the front, this surface is arced, and if I rotate and go to this view, then this face basically I cannot see. So that means this surface from that view basically goes straight this line. So that required I also create a perpendicular line when I want to extrude the surface. And there I did basically the same. Click on the line, go to side view, and draft out the length. And that was basically it. Now I have a path which I could use, for example, for the rail, to use this generation curve along this rail. So you see a little bit of measurement, planning out, and then I have most of those dimensions in. Now let's take a look at this one. This is actually an EP curve, which, because this is a very organic shape, I was able to simply create by snapping to all those control points. Obviously, this line down here will stop right here, and then I will have a sharp edge. So what I did here actually is I adjusted this EP curve by moving those two CVs a little bit, so I get a nice straight line. and then the original curve continues. This, for example, I can then later use for my revolve command. You also see I set my pivot point directly along this line, which is kind of like the revolve axis. I also built this one a little bit bigger, so when later I trim the tip off with a surface I generate out of those lines, I have extra surface material from this revolve I could work with. And by this way, when later I'm going to create my railed surface, my revolve surface down here, I'm going to have a nice rounded profile and surface, while obviously up here I will have a sharp cut. Okay, so I think now we're ready to create all the different surfaces. So this EP curve I'm going to revolve along the y-axis, local, okay. And let's move this one on this layer. And let's take a look. Or for example, this one fields, but first let's change those. And there. So this actually looks pretty clean. You see here we have a nice transition. So this is actually quite good. Okay, so now I hope this one, for example, gave a good start for how I built a bigger piece, how I built the whole surface bigger, and later carve kind of like the linear part out of this big part. Again, always think about how would you build this one out of foam. Build the bigger parts first and then start carving. So for example, the back is revolved, so I do the same. Let's click on this one. I am going to set my pivot point just to the center, go to revolve, whoops, wrong one. And select this one, it should be the same. Okay, works perfect. Not 100%, you see there is a little bit of a problem because let's see if maybe if we change this, if this looks better. Okay, there's still a slight problem, but maybe for what we're doing that is okay. Otherwise I could also cut this open and patch in a new kind of like base surface, but for the moment this is fine. Okay, perfect, good. Let's make sure all those surfaces are on that layer. And for example, let's call this one base surface. Whoops. And here I call this one tip surface. So it makes sense to organize my layers a little bit. So now I have to start creating all the different surfaces that I can use to define kind of like the tooltip and then cut out of the base surface we created. So I'm going to rail this one along this rail. So let's go to rail 1, 1. Okay, this one along this one. And yep, it's on this correct layer. This profile I'm going to rail down that way. There. Okay. Let's take a look. It looks also good. Okay. And here the front part I probably have to cap. So here I'm creating myself a make draft surface. Nice and big. Let's take a look what we have. Okay. That looks decent. So now before I do anything, I have to see if everything is going to work out fine. And I'm running probably here maybe into an issue. You see actually that this surface does not penetrate my arc. So either I have to extend that surface further this way or change the points. So I have to see maybe what I can do. So I'm going to make myself a new layer, call this one trim, and actually no, I'm going to copy and paste those onto that layer because I want to see if this actually could work. So this surface I would like to make a little bit bigger. It should stick out beyond the main handled surface. So we can go to extend and push it out. Okay. Maybe this one, I don't necessarily, well, maybe this one here I extend there, and I extend there. Maybe here actually I do a lot, just for the sake. Okay. And then I have to see what I can do with the back part. So if I push this one over, so still too much. So let's undo this one. And actually, if I go to extend, you see I can also extend just a line. But that's not really what I want. So maybe in this case, I have to adjust maybe one CV. Let's maybe look at this one, move it along the z-axis. Yeah, you see there, now it starts sticking out. So I can extend this edge maybe there a little bit. And then I go back to CV and see if I push this one back, what shape I get. So maybe I do it this way. Okay, good. Let's turn this one off. From this surface I need to duplicate, so I go to Edit, Duplicate, Mirror, the Z and Y axes. Yep, that's correct. There it is. Okay, let's save. And now I can start actually trimming all those surfaces with each other. So I go to intersect and say this intersect with this surface and this surface and this surface and this surface. Okay. And for example, now we can go and trim and say here, this one keep. Let's see how this one looks. Looks actually like what I need there. Obviously, this part sticks out. So there's a small problem. You see this arc touched this point on my curve network or layout. So I need to extend this edge a little bit more. So I go back to extend, select this edge, push it out, and there. And then I can go to trim, and this part I remove. Okay. So let's take a look. Whoops. That's not what I meant. And invisible. Yeah. So this is getting to somewhere. Okay, let's send everything back. Now I have to start cutting all those other surfaces with each other. So this one, cut with this surface and this surface, and this surface. And let's do that one more time. This one intersect with this one. Okay, and no, I do not have, for example, those two surfaces intersect with this one. So I'm paying attention to that everywhere I have a nice set of close shapes. So save. Think now I could go to here. Green, green, green corners. So that's good. I think I can save. Keep. Yep, worked. Say here, keep. Okay. Here, keep. See, there are other areas as well, but I just want to discard them and keep. Oh, shoot. Revert. That's interesting. So I think this surface I have to unstitch. Okay. So maybe I have to extend it a little bit. There. Move it out. So now I have a better trim curve between this surface and this surface. Keep and keep. Yeah, there it is. Cool. So this actually worked out pretty well. So I can save this one. And now because I did not touch my original surface, which has all the construction geometry running, I could actually now go back and, for example, redo everything here. But for example, then I would have to adjust, for example, those curves a little bit, because you see all those surfaces are a little bit too short, so I would have to change all my key point curves first, so that I have bigger surfaces which help me to do what I want. So I don't necessarily have to go back and redo everything, because actually this piece already is quite sufficient. I can, for example, go ahead and select this one, turn on, for example, the edit points, and for example here, if I want to do, I can sculpt this shell a little bit. Or maybe those points here I would like to go inwards a little bit. So I'm somewhat losing construction history from the beginning, but actually, because those parts are all interactive, I mean all the trimming command here is interactive, I get a different set of interactive modeling abilities. So for example, this way I could sculpt that one. That's a little bit stronger than my original model. So maybe this one here I push out a little bit. There. I'm actually curious, because I have way too many control points here right now. Let's save. And I'm curious what happens if I change this one to degree 3. Works. Ah, beautiful. So you know, much less points to move. This is going to be easier. There. Okay. That's pretty nice. If I want, I could maybe even scale these 2 points together. Let's zoom in a little bit. Go to scale. Set my pivot point to there. So I have a center point, and then maybe scale this. Go to the side. So I'm creating a bigger pinched surface there, if I want to. I don't have to. Maybe I keep it this way, it's nice and even. Okay. Now at this point, I can continue trying to fine-tune the design, or actually leave it. Let's say this is good for the moment. There's one last thing maybe we can preview, because everything else, the shelling, etc., for example, I would do inside Fusion. Here, for example, right now, we could go maybe make a quick preview of the edge rounding with the round tool. And for example, select all those edges I would like to round and set this corner type. I do not select those. You know what? Maybe. Yeah, I can do that. Let's do it. Let's keep nice and round. Corners here. Oh, I can't do that. So that's interesting. Should normally be able. Oh, I didn't click the edge. That's the reason why it didn't work. Forgot it. Okay, good. And there's a last corner option. I'm not sure if this might be a little bit too big. So let's see. Yeah, I think this one can work. So for example, this gives us an idea of how maybe a rounded edge quickly could look like. I'm not sure if I necessarily like this situation here. See the fillet changes a little bit, but that's pretty much a tough corner here because we have the surface coming flat in there. We don't really have a sharp corner compared to here. But because this actually I would like to redo in Fusion with better rounding capabilities. Currently this is only G1. Fusion can do this one actually with G2. And go to Query Edit, select this edge rounding set, click Revert and undo it. Because again, I try to do in Alias only the hard edge surface modeling, and then the rest I do inside Fusion. Okay, so at this point, for example, I could bring back, for example, make a copy of this tip, copy and paste, push it over onto that layer. And for example, now maybe it's time to bring back our razor blade model. So I go to File, Import, File, and I go to Downloads, and here's my Alias model, which has everything in here, and I have to see where is the part. Okay, There it is, down there. So interesting. How did it create all those layers? Oh, so FYI, it copies kind of like the parts the way how you have it set on layers and populates them by the numbers. It's not just adding the layers, but here's, for example, the stitched mesh. This one, for example, I'm going to put onto this layer. And I have to rotate it. So let's select the object, rotate 0, 0, 90. There. Let's move it up. And in my case, it actually sticks out pretty well. So let's see if actually I built my design correctly, or if maybe I hold on. What's going on with the rotate here? Let's go local. Oh, it's a y-axis. Okay, rotate y, and there, and then I can try to move it in. And try to, for example, I'm going to align it with this part. Let's move it up a little bit more, maybe to there. Okay, so now, for example, there you can see how much material I have left and right, and that actually maybe is a little bit too much. I could, for example, select this surface and this surface, turn on the CVs. For example, those 2 points I would like to scale closer to each other. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create myself an EP curve just in between those 2 points. And then I'm going to select those 2 surfaces, EP, snap to the subdivision of this line. This line now I don't need anymore. But if I select those CVs, you see where that one is, and then I can go and scale. And for example, scale this one there. Make this one look a little bit better. Okay, I think that needs to be tighter. Perfect. Let's not show those anymore. And there we are. Now can, for example, do one last maybe preview, shaded view. Take a look at how all these highlights flow over our model. Maybe look for any irregularities. And I think at this point, now we're ready to export everything, including the blade, into Fusion. But the blade I actually tried to import, not rotate it. So I actually, before I do that, I copy and paste, move this one down, and I'm going to change my rotation to 0. Okay, because this part I would like to have this way as well. I click save, and I don't have to export anything. I actually, when we go to Fusion, I can simply import the native alias file. And that's everything for our alias.